Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Peterson Institute for International Economics. I'm Adam Posen, the Institute's president, and it's our privilege today to welcome Jin Liqun, the inaugural president and chair of board of directors of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, commonly known as the AIIB. Several years ago, we had the privilege for multiple interactions with President Jin while he was planning and while the stakeholders were planning and then setting up the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. At that time, the US government was making a lot of noise against the bank founding, ostensibly, I gather, out of concern of it being undercutting other multilateral development banks and possibly undercutting international institutions. At the time, myself, Fred Bergston, Nick Lardy, and other members, senior members of the Peterson team spoke out and said we viewed the AIIB as a potentially very good idea and one that should be judged not by its headquarters location or its main shareholder, but by its actions. President Jin has, in the last several years, tried to make those actions worthwhile, emphasizing that the bank should live up to best practices and multilateral standards. And today, he's not so much going to take a stock taking as take on a broader topic of how we need more and better multilateralism in times of crisis. Just a word about President Jin's distinguished career. He's just recently coming up begun his second 5-year term as president of the bank, beginning on January 16th of this year. Before being elected as the bank's first founding president, he served as Secretary General of the Multilateral Interim Secretariat tasked with establishing the bank, of course. He has rich experience across the private and public sectors and with multilateral development institutions. He served as chair of China International Capital Corporation, China's first joint venture investment bank, chair of the supervisory board of China Investment Corporation, and chair of the International Forum of Sovereign Wealth Funds. He previously served as vice president and then ranking vice president of the Asian Development Bank, and as an alternative executive director for China at the World Bank. He spent nearly 2 decades prior to that in the Chinese Ministry of Finance, reaching the rank of vice minister. He interestingly, and if you get the opportunity to speak with him very clearly, held a master's degree in English literature from Beijing Institute of Foreign Languages. And he also was a Hubert Humphrey Fellow in the Economics Graduate Program at Boston University. You are a major player on the world stage. Your institution continues to grow. President Jin, thank you for joining us at the Peterson Institute today.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Adam, for your very nice words and introduction. It's really my great honor and privilege to talk to you and the audience you've organized for me tonight. And for you, I think it's in the morning. Let me say a few words before we start the Q&A. I remember President John F. Kennedy started a bipartisan tradition when he once remarked that in the Chinese language, the word crisis is composed of 2 characters, one representing danger and the other opportunity. Ever since then, a number of prominent American political figures, including President Nixon, Condoleezza Rice, and Al Gore, have used the Chinese character framing when linking crisis to opportunity. The durability of the expression is now well known in American political circles. Recently, however, a professor of Chinese language and literature at the University of Pennsylvania investigated this rhetorical device further and found that while crisis is wei ji, wei does in fact means danger. Ji represents a crucial point when something begins or changes. Thus, a wei ji is indeed a genuine crisis, a dangerous moment, a time when things start to go awry. Today, the world finds itself at a crucial point. We're confronted with danger as a result of the confluence of crises on multiple fronts. I like to quote another Chinese saying. We have a saying, a nation or its people flourish in adversity and perish in pleasure. Or if I translate it in a different way, it could be adversity animates, pleasure kills. The world is facing a set of formidable challenges, and in tackling them, we can emerge stronger and more resilient. A fortnight ago, when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its findings, UN Secretary General called the report a code red for humanity. The COVID-19 health emergency has continued unabated and is likely to last for longer than any of us had expected. And for the first time in a decade, 8 agencies have seen development gains eroded. This indiscriminate existential threat does not respect the borders. The rewards of international cooperation have been numerous. We eradicated the smallpox, witnessed a reduction in mortality rates from HIV/AIDS, contained infectious disease outbreaks like Ebola, navigated through the 2018 global financial crisis, and together we have seen 2 billion people moved out of extreme poverty. Multilateralism proved its potency and efficacy in the post-World War II reconstruction efforts. The Bretton Woods system and the 2 multilateral financial institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, represent the prototype of the multilateral cooperation. The United States played a leading role in the process of setting up a global economic and financial order. Paradoxically, the Bretton Woods system collapsed in 1972, but its multilateral ethos has demonstrated its stamina. The regional development banks created since then are all of them issues of this pedigree. It's deeply unsettling, however, to see the recent rise in populism and narrow self-interest. Common human values should prevail over politics. The Biden administration's commitment to multilateralism is very encouraging. Major powers need to work in close collaboration to reverse the erosion of multilateral cooperation seen in recent years. Multilateral approach is the key to the solution of global crisis. The international community needs to be strengthened, not weakened. We need to reinforce the institutions and mechanisms that support us working together, reform and eliminate those that don't, and create those we need. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB, was created as a direct response to a genuine desire among countries for greater, not less, international cooperation. Bridging a significant gap in infrastructure financing is what anchors AIIB, but it is meaningful cooperation among our 103 members that is the bedrock of our mission. Infrastructure is a long, risky, and expensive game. It's simply not financially feasible for one institution to go it alone. So we work together with our members, our peer multilateral development banks, private sector, and civil society to deliver a more sustainable future for everyone. There are critics who say that multilateralism is sluggish, old-fashioned, largely ineffective. We have found that, in fact, the opposite is true. The opposite is true. Our commitment to multilateralism has certainly not hampered us. Instead, AIIB has proven to be agile in the face of the crisis. Soon after the outbreak of the pandemic, we allocated $13 billion to a COVID-19 response facility to help our members through a devastating period. Most of funds were invested together with other MDBs, and it was truly rewarding to see the coordination and collaboration. At AIIB, we are currently assessing how best to assist our members as they face the impact of climate change. For many of our low-income countries in Asia, adaptation is key, and hence we have decided to enhance our investment in projects that have a strong adaptation element. As a multilateral development bank, we are working with other MDBs to ensure that we play our part in the joint campaign against the climate change. Our corporate strategy, which the board approved last year, committed us to making 50% of our investment climate related by 2025. We're already at 41%. Internally, we are discussing Paris alignment of our operations. It's quite common for people to keep a sense of us and them. There is actually no difference when it comes to global challenges. We are all us, not them. The reality is that the borders and walls we create and draw around ourselves are often artificial. In the vast universe, we are a minuscule species in a tiny planet, vulnerable to all kinds of disasters. There's little we can do to stave off a natural catastrophe, but a lot we can to avoid an anthropogenic one. In our present moment, the case for more and better multilateralism is strongest it has ever been. If we choose to ignore, we will suffer the consequences at our own peril. Let me stop here, and I'd like to pick your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Jin. It's a very inspiring perspective that there is no them, only us in these times of dangerous crisis. I would like to ask you a few things on behalf of our audience and the Peterson Institute Fellows. How do you feel that the pandemic has changed the kinds of projects that the bank is considering? I mean, do you take an initiative and ask for particular kinds of projects to support public health, or are you on the same track even after the pandemic in terms of your lending agenda?
Thank you very much. Your question reminds me of the negotiation by the chief negotiators from the beginning of 2014 to the end of 2015. We discussed the mandate of the future bank we are all working to set up. The bank was titled as the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. But we all knew that we should not make a mandate which is too restrictive, too narrow, so much so that the bank would be poorly equipped to adapt to change the situations in the future. And I also recall that EBRD had a very narrow mandate to financing the transition from the former system to market economy. And we all remember 15 years later, the mission completed, and EBRD would have to broaden its mandate. That is why when we set up this bank, we thought infrastructure is the theme, the major theme of this bank, but there should be other productive sectors which we should finance. And other productive sectors financing can reinforce the infrastructure investment, including the social infrastructure, healthcare system. And now we understand it's really important. Moving forward, we may, even after we bring the COVID-19 pandemic under control, we still need to allocate a certain amount of resources for healthcare so that the low-income countries will be able to respond to healthcare hazards and crisis. And I think this is probably first time we respond to crisis in an agile way. And this means that mandate we created for ourselves is really very, very good and broad-based.
Thank you. Sort of turning it around, outside the MDB sector, there's a lot of concern over debt in general. And in particular, people at the IMF and the BIS and elsewhere have been warning about there being unsustainable debts made worse by the pandemic and the limited ability of some borrowers to pay those debts back in the future. How is the AIIB coordinating with the other major institutions on this question of unsustainable debt for some of your members? And do you view this as a big vulnerability if, say, the US were to raise rates? What happens?
That's a very important question. As you see, the debt has been an issue which troubled a lot of countries all these years. I remember early in the 1980s, when I started to work with the World Bank, and even after I came back in the Ministry of Finance, I was in charge of the multilateral institutions. And debt has been a persistent problem over these years. So we need to pay attention to the debt issues, and we need to learn a lesson from the debt problems. My view is, on the one hand, it's really important for us to find the root causes of the heavy indebtedness of a number of countries and try to avoid the repetition of same kind of problems. But what is most important in my view is not to be intimidated by the debt problems and will not be willing to work towards solving the debt problems moving forward. So we need to have a holistic view toward debt sustainability. You see, the fundamental problem is whether the borrowings, whether the financing of the projects, whatever they may be, could be paved a path for the sustained growth so that they can generate, all these projects can generate revenues in the future, thereby augmenting the base of the economy and reducing the debt ratio. So that is why we do not think, even in the case of a country which is suffering from debt problems, we should stop financing important projects in them. That would be killing. Now, we aim to finance infrastructure projects for tomorrow. Infrastructure that is environmentally, economically, and socially sustainable. And this actually includes debt sustainability as an integral component of financing considerations. So this is the most important. And secondly, I think the public and external debt of many countries in Asia, yes, have been on the rise. And this is especially for smaller economies, where some large infrastructure projects may cause debt to GDP ratio to increase quickly. So we need to identify high quality infrastructure products, which is very, very important. That's the only way for us to help these countries to ease the debt burden eventually when these kind of projects would be generating revenues. Now, I would also like to highlight, when we finance low-income, poor countries, we always consult the International Monetary Fund. We want to make sure that the project we financed will not be an additional burden on those countries. And also, we attach great importance to mobilizing private sector resources to finance infrastructure projects so that this will not put an additional burden on the public balance sheet. So in a nutshell, that problem needs to be taken seriously. But we need to help these heavily indebted countries to work themselves out of debt.
Thank you. In that context, we have seen a rise in collateralized lending to poor developing countries. The IMF, the World Bank, your peers at the African Development Bank have raised an alarm about this. What is your view on asset and revenue-backed lending? When you have other creditors partnering with you, do they push you to use that kind of form versus more straight up development lending? How do you see that issue?
I think we need to differentiate between collateralized debt and lending, and which is good or which is not so good. You should not categorically reject all of this kind of lending, collateralized lending. On the good side, collateralization is a major credit enhancement, which can substantially reduce the interest rate and make more projects viable and contribute to debt sustainability, akin to a kind of mortgage. On the bad side, collateralization is a foul play meant to improve seniority of one's claims at the expense of other creditors, akin to jumping the queue. And in the extreme, I think it can violate the negative pledge clause in those creditors' contracts. So we need a recipe, and the recipe is clear. Continue doing good things, stop doing bad things. A project related to collateral, such as a future toll revenue for a loan, could be acceptable. But collateral oil revenues and other assets unrelated to the project perhaps should be rejected. And in the spirit of cooperation, I think creditors should not be doing this to each other, or else everybody would stand to lose. I think the key issue here is cooperation, as well as debt transparency. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned that about transparency, and of course, our colleague Adam Gilpern has been leading an effort for many years about transparency in lending. AIIB, to your credit, like the Bretton Woods Institution, publishes the general conditions and terms of lending on its website. Unfortunately, a lot of other official lenders and hardly any private lenders do the same. And that includes things, of course, like the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. What can be done to make more transparency and publication the norm? Is there anything the AIIB can be doing to push for greater debt transparency from other lenders?
I think debt transparency is certainly very, very important. And we are very much willing to continue to provide substantial information and to those, so that all those who are involved would know what is the actual situations of the countries or our partners. So I think it's a little bit difficult for all of the institutions, particularly some of the private sector companies, to do the same. And we work with other multilateral institutions in providing necessary information, and we hope this could be encouraged. This practice could encourage others to do the same. Now, transparency is important for the multilateral development banks, and also I think it would enhance our credibility and also help us to know each other better, those who work with us. I think some people might be a little bit worried. Sometimes it might be related to the, for instance, particularly in the private sector, the commercial confidential information which might make it hard for them to do any deal. But we remain very open, except for something very sensitive, and I don't think it should be a problem. So I think we need to continue to work together and to improve the transparency of the financing by the multilateral institutions, and then we hope the other investors could do the same. Thank you.
Thank you. I realize that you are an international official, not a Chinese official, but obviously there's a great deal of attention to the Belt and Road Initiative and how that is affecting financing and infrastructure in particular through a number of your member countries and lending countries. Could you say a bit about how you, from your view, from your post at the AIIB, see the impact of Belt and Road, and to what degree the AIIB coordinates with Belt and Road lending?
China initiated the creation of this bank, and from the very beginning, when I was appointed to serve as the head of the Chinese working group, and then when I was elected as the Secretary General of the Interim Multilateral Secretariat, I went through the whole process, and I knew and I know how probably difficult it is to convince the other partners to understand we are building a multilateral institution in a true sense of the word. This was pretty difficult at the very beginning when we started to negotiate with the ASEAN countries and joined by the Gulf countries and the Central Asian countries. But the negotiation process itself worked very well and convinced a lot of countries, particularly OECD countries, that China was very serious in setting up a bank which would be truly multilateral. Without surprise, for a major shareholder as China, and with China's ever-increasing economic power, a lot of people would regard this institution as a China bank. But I'm not very much bothered about that. I think what can convince the people or those people who are suspicious is not my clarification in words. I think it's a clarification in deed. So we, in the management, have been working very hard to uphold basic principles. So there are some aspects you can look at to be convinced of the multilateral feature of this bank. First of all, look at the governance structure. Look at the modus operandi. Look at the way we process projects. And look at the organization structure and the senior management team. In the senior management team, I am the only Chinese national. We have 5 vice presidents, 3 from European countries, 2 from Asian countries. And when you go to the next level, we have Chief Economist Eric from Sweden, and we have Chief Risk Officer Martin Kimmich of Germany, and all the other senior management members are not Chinese. So we go by the governance, by our structure, organization structure, and appointment of the senior people, who are all very much representative of our constituency. And of course, it's very important to see what we do and how we do it. So the standards, environmental social standards, which we apply are on the par with that of the World Bank, AIIB, and other institutions. Otherwise, we cannot co-finance infrastructure projects or COVID-19 projects. Now, a lot of people talked about the bank's relationship with Belt and Road Initiative. And a lot of people confuse these two initiatives. They thought AIIB is a Belt and Road bank, certainly, which is not true. Now, if these two initiatives are the same, why should we have two? But just have one. I try to clarify that AIIB is a multilateral development institution with its governance structure, with its modus operandi. Basically, this is a bank in the gene pool of multilateral institutions. It operates by its playbook, by its rules. Whereas Belt and Road Initiative is the platform, is an international platform for all of the interested participants to join and work together. It's not an institution. President Xi talked about the general principle guiding the Belt and Road: broad-based consultation, joint construction, and share the benefit, which means this is the platform. So I think the distinction is very clear, but there's certain relationship because we finance infrastructure projects in our member countries. Belt Road is basically focused also on infrastructure, but we process projects which are proposed to us by the client members. We don't pick projects from any other government. We just process the projects proposed to us from our client countries. And we don't fix labels. We don't think, oh, this is Belt Road, this is not. I don't think that makes a lot of sense because we operate by our own standards. If I'm approached by a country, say, hey, we have a Belt Road project, can you finance? We have our people process it. If it's very good, meeting all the international standards, we accept it, environmental, social, whatever. And if our professional team thinks this is a good one, we do it, or we don't do it. So if we finance Belt Road projects proposed to us by our members, we want to make sure that these projects would meet the high standards for a development bank. That's the difference, and also certain relationship.
Thank you. I want to come to the issues of climate change and environment, which of course are incredibly critical, but one last question on governance before we turn to those. Japan and the United States have stayed out of membership in the AIIB. Leaving aside what you or I might want, how has that affected the AIIB? And how do you think that affects the multilateral system that they chose to stay out?
From the very beginning, we would like to invite the United States and Japan to join, not to join the bank, to join in the creation of this bank. And now from 57 founding members, we have now 103, with 88 members fully ratified and becoming full members. Certainly, this is frequently asked question, what do you think about the United States, Japan, would they be joining? And I often said, certainly this is not a question for me to answer, but we have the door open, and if they decide to join anytime, then they're most welcome. However, I would like to highlight the point that regardless of the membership, we can work together. The AIIB is the multilateral institution which is inclusive, And we have some special features which transcends some of the standards of the existing institutions. For instance, in a multilateral development bank, only the nationals of the member countries can be employed. Only the companies of the members can participate in international competitive bidding. These are two main restrictions. We don't. We have American nationals and Japanese working in our institution, and some of them take very important positions. And we have broad-based cooperation with the American financial institutions. And I also had a meeting in Washington, D.C. with US Chamber of Commerce encouraging the American companies to join. Not long ago, I went to Shanghai, attended a meeting of the American Chamber of Commerce Shanghai, and give them information and invite American business people to join and to bid for the contracts. I'll give you some of the examples. We have hired at least one US bank as lead managers in each and every benchmark bond we have issued so far, and have traded with 5 US banks to arrange 16 bond private placements for a combined equivalent amount of $695 million US. And we bank with one US entity, Bank New York Mellon, for our US dollar cash account to manage both investment loans and treasury operations, G10 currencies, and investments in money market funds. And we also have signed ISDA master agreement with 3 US banks. These support 17 executed swaps for a combined notional of $9 billion US. And negotiations are going on to sign 2 further ISDAs with US counterparts. Now, I don't want to waste time to give you the whole catalog of our cooperation with American financial institutions. And when we issue the bonds, we also engaged Nomura to be our lead manager. So regardless of the membership, we work together. And I think this indicates that we adhere to the basic principles of a multilateral institution, and we are inclusive. Of course, moving forward, if one of these days the United States government or Japan would like to join, they are very much welcome.
Thank you. So as mentioned, and as you said in your opening remarks, climate change is now everyone's responsibility, including the AIIB. We know that from the start, one of your core missions is funding infrastructure for tomorrow, quote unquote, which includes environmental stability and sustainability and resilience. You have members like Bangladesh that are ground zero, so to speak, for flooding and global warming. And as we know, not that the US is doing great on these things, but a week ago, the US Department of the Treasury announced new fossil fuel energy guidance for multilateral development banks. Can you give us, in your remaining time, what specifically is on the AIIB's agenda in terms of climate change, in terms of lending criteria, in terms of promoting certain kinds of projects, in terms of other kinds of restrictions? What is the action agenda on climate change for you and the bank?
Thank you very much for the question. We have paid special attention to the climate change mitigation and adaptation. Earlier on, in 2017, when we prepared the energy strategy, maybe I would say the bank was set up right after the Paris Agreement was entered into. And a couple of months later, the bank was up and running. So in 2017, our board approved the energy strategy. In this strategy, we did not rule out coal, but we set a very tough conditionality on any project related to coal, particularly coal-firing power plants, such as there will be net reduction in emission by building a high-efficient with new coal technology power plant, which will replace outdated technology, something of that kind. So we set very tough conditions on financing any coal power plants. However, we did not process any coal projects. From day one, we never ever financed any coal project. And also I can say we do not finance any project which is functionally related to coal. For instance, we turned down a project. It's a transmission project. We turned it down because it would support the power supply of a coal-fired power plant, and we decided not to do it. Now, that was the story of 2017. Now we are in 2021. I announced more than a year ago that we would not finance any coal projects or related to coal. And pending the revision or updating of the energy strategy, we have ruled out all of the coal projects, and we are not going to do anything of that kind. We focus instead on the renewables, on energy efficiency, and we may very soon revise the energy strategy. And I can assure you, the new updated energy strategy will definitely rule out coal altogether. But, you know, we have the corporate strategy, which set the target of 50% of total approved financing by 2025 for climate change mitigation and adaptation. At this stage, we have 41%. So by 2025, we will have 50%. But 50% of climate change financing is not the floor. It's the floor, it's not the ceiling. So we should at least do 50%. So we are also working on the Paris alignment methodology, which can help us to meet the high standards, and which also makes it possible for us to work in close collaboration with the World Bank, AIIB, EBRD, and all those development institutions. So we are very firm, and we believe that while the multilateral development bank's financing is still very much limited, but we serve as the beacon. We guide our clients as to how they should allocate their resources when they develop their infrastructure projects, when they develop their power sector, to pave the path for their development. That is, I would say, the significant role of the MDBs. The financing is limited, but our policy influence and impact could be great. And let me stop here.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure to have this frank and open discussion with you and to hear your views at some length, particularly now on climate change, but also more broadly, your call for better and more, or more and better multilateralism in dealing with the global crises we face, starting with the pandemic. On behalf of the Peterson Institute for International Economics and our audience globally, please let me thank Mr. Jin Liqun, President and Chair of the Board of Directors of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. This meeting is adjourned.